do the minutes after that. Anybody from the public in, it's 14 after, so it should be plenty of time.
Yeah. Devontae or John, do we see anybody in the public room that would like to join?
Okay, then with no public there, I will ask for a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All right, minutes are approved.
Great.
Now, Fred in yet or not? So he should be in for the review, I would think.
Mr. Yates, anything else from you before we jump in?
No, I just wonder if we should wait for give Fred a couple more minutes because he wasn't at the meeting before you start the review. Actually,
Do we need to let them know who's online?
Sure, we'll let it. I'll tell you what. We'll as soon as Mr. Stant gets on there, I'll let you know who's on our end, Mr. Yates. We have a few people here in Angel's office, and I've got a few staff online too.
I see. Yeah, I can see all the names.
Yeah, I could like to introduce a few of those folks.
Well, you want to go ahead and introduce those now? I don't think.
Sure.
Fred will care,
Sure.
and then we'll go ahead with the review after that. Go ahead. All right.
I'll introduce myself. I wasn't here at the last meeting. I had other commitments as we were talking earlier that I couldn't avoid. So I'm Russ. I'm the local assistance division director, and I'll walk us through this PowerPoint this morning, and we'll talk about the proposals and some of the comments and everything. In this room, I have Angel Dean. She's our chief of policy. I think everyone knows Angel. And Kim Pryor. I think everyone knows Kim. You get to see her every month at the CTB. She's in charge. She's in charge of all the money. So Kim is here with us, and also from my staff is Terry Short, and he is our assistant division administrator for program management, and TA and revenue sharing all fall underneath his part of the division. And I also have Brittany Vall. She is our transportation alternatives program manager with us. And Brittany, I think you also have Michelle Piccolomini with you. Is that correct?
Yes.
We have, so. And Michelle is our revenue sharing program manager. So any details, nitty gritty type questions, they are certainly the people to answer those questions. So that's what we have here.
I don't see Brittany. Put your video, Brittany, so I can recognize you, please.
You have a video, a camera on your computer, Brittany? There you.
Oh, okay, good. Now,
there you go.
There we go.
Okay.
Also
thanks.
in the room here have Yolanda and Jonathan.
Okay, so we also have Yolanda Newton. She is our state programs manager. So all the state funded programs fall underneath Yolanda. And Jonathan Liss. Jonathan Liss is in charge of access programs and has taken on a few new roles for a while, and they're going to help us out.
Who is John Steele?
John Steele is our IT guru, and he's the one trying to get us all
I got you. Okay.
Here. And then we have Devontae Smith. He works with John, and they're our communication staff that are keeping us connected. I see Mr. Stant has joined us.
Okay, and should we identify the CTB members on here?
Sure. Want to just go through one by one? And
I'm on. Greg Yates, chair of this committee, and happy to finally get on. All right, just go right down the line. Who's next?
I'll take it. Randy Laird.
Mary Hines.
Ty Lawson.
Fred, can you make
Fred
your mic
is on.
work?
Okay.
Well, can he make his mic work? That's important. Can you talk, Fred?
He's currently muted.
I see he's muted.
Can you guys unmute him?
There you go.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Glad you could make it, Fred.
I've been trying since 9 o'clock.
Jeez.
Okay.
So you're rip raring to go.
All right. Okay, Ross, we'll let you go, or you or Angel, whoever wants to go next, and do the brief review would be great.
All right, so I'll get us started here, and I think we're still waiting on Miss Sellers to join us. I'm trying to turn off this phone there. And so what I'd like to start off with is just a review of our of what we're going to do today. So we've looked for public comment. We don't have it. But what I'd like to do is start off with just a review of the purpose of what we're doing here, and just reestablish the purpose. And then we've already approved the minutes, but we'll go through what we talked about last meeting. And then we got some questions that were asked of the revenue sharing as we went through revenue sharing, and then we'll move on to transportation alternatives policy initiatives. So today I want to start off with a review of the purpose of our proposals. And so I wasn't here, but I think I can wrap it up with basically 3 bullets. And those 3 bullets are: first, we want to make sure that we have equity in the allocation distribution that we provide to all our localities. When we revised the revenue sharing policy back in 2018, we had a subcommittee, and the subcommittee started off with a statement of purpose, priorities, and recommendations, which guided their policy development. And in that statement, they stated that that's probably Ms. Sellers right there, that all our policies should be developed with the understanding that allocations are provided to localities for specific projects and are not allocations to localities for their general use on other transportation projects. So we're going to continue with that in mind. So we want to make sure that all localities, big and small, have the same access to funds that are no longer needed for the projects that they were originally allocated to. Today, small projects that only have 1 or 2 projects, in their coffers, have to cover any deficits, and they don't have opportunity to access surplus funds like a locality with multiple revenue sharing projects have. We also want to make sure that the redistribution process is fair and puts our excess funds to use as quickly as possible. Secondly, we want to make sure our processes create efficiencies in the management of our program. Today, just FYI, we have no more staff to work on our revenue sharing and TAP programs than we did really 17 years ago. And the revenue sharing program has moved from a $15 million program to a $100 million a year program. And way back then, it didn't even include cities and towns. And of course, we all know the TAP program has increased by about 40% with IIJA. And then finally, our VDOT funding programs are complicated. And the more we can sync our policies across our funding programs, the easier it will be for our stakeholders to navigate those programs. So while we have to recognize differences in the purposes of the programs and the sizes of the programs, we are striving to make our policies as harmonious as possible, and that will make it easier for our stakeholders. So that's I want to start off with that just to sort of restate what we're doing here. And I've lost my feed. Let me try this again. For some reason, it just dropped off.
Can everybody else?
There it goes. It's back up there again. All right. For some reason, I lost the feed there for a second. So I'm back on there. And so let's review the last meeting. Everyone's hopefully has had a chance to review the minutes and take a look at those. We did hold it after a CTB monthly meeting, so we didn't have a lot of time to review the entire package of information that we sent out. But we were able to get through all the initiatives for revenue sharing. The discussion focused on the desire to modify the process by which we reallocate surplus funds and moving it to a more statewide prioritization process rather than leaving the funding within individual localities. It's not to say that the individual localities don't get the funding they need. It just needs to go through a statewide prioritization process. As I noticed in the previous slide, the intent is to make sure that everyone gets the funding they need, but do it in a more systematic, equitable, and efficient manner. I understand that we had some real good conversation on the revenue sharing policy initiatives, and we had some homework to do and answer some questions. So we'll get to that in the next slide. don't have any questions on the minutes or what we went over last week, I'll move on to the answers to some of your questions. And feel free just to interrupt me at any time as I move through this.
I muted myself. I do have one question.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry. So we did not talk, I don't think, about changing the stack of funding priorities for initially getting revenue sharing. This prioritization piece that I thought we talked about was if you're short of money, how you would get more money under the proposal that staff put to us. And we asked that there be more detail in that, but I just want to double check that my understanding was correct. We're not talking about changing how you get a revenue sharing project in the beginning.
That's right.
No, we're not. That is established in code.
Okay, good.
Any change to that process would have to go through the legislative process.
That's good. I just wanted to make sure we were clear that the prioritization we're talking about is to fill a gap, and whether that money comes back to the state or has some utility in a district for some period of time. Okay.
Right. And I guess really this gets to just making sure that everyone has the same access to the funds. So we're talking about surplus funds. We're not really talking about the original funds.
Okay, good.
The original funds go through that 4-tier prioritization process. And I think we went through that last week, but I'll hit on them real quick. Priority 1 for receiving TAP allocations during the application cycle are those projects that already have revenue sharing money. 2 are those that advance a project in the CIP or meet a V-Trans need. Priority 3 are those projects that will meet a maintenance deficiency need, and priority 4 are any other projects that would otherwise be eligible for transportation money from the state. So those are the 4 priorities, and it's directed to us that we have to provide funding in that order.
Russ, the way it works now, if there's a attempt to reallocate, it's being reallocated to other approved or trying to be reallocated to other approved projects, right? Not just given to the county, city, or town for whatever purposes they may want to use it. They're asking, the way it's doing now is they've got a surplus in a project because they had a cost savings. And they're saying, can we use the excess on another project that's already been approved by the state? Because we're sensing that one may need more funding or for whatever reason.
Yes, today. So what will happen is if a locality has a number of projects and they have a surplus on one project, they will generally we have some caveats. It has to be done within 6 months of them completing one project, and it has to go to another project is going to advertisement within 12 months. They will generally ask, hey, can I move the surplus from project A to project B? And then those are all typically revenue sharing projects. There is a process to moving revenue sharing money to a non-revenue sharing project, but that goes in front of the whole board, and that does it creates a new revenue sharing project without going through the application process.
But what you're talking about is altering and I'm familiar with this. The way it works now is a locality, and they ought to do this. They're being incentivized to save money if they can, and if they do, they come in under the cost, so they've got some excess funds. And so what they're asking is, can we move it to another approved revenue sharing project? And you're recommending that we change that?
So when we first made this recommendation, that was the intent. Hey, let's provide incentives to save money. I can be honest with you and say that's not what's happening. What's happening is that we're creating incentives to increase estimates or increase allocation requests. So they end up with more money at the end of the day. So what we're proposing is not to prevent anyone who needs more money from getting the money that they need. We want that done because that gets the money spent as quickly as possible, and that's what we want to do. Our ultimate goal is to spend the money and get the projects done. But what we have today is an inequitable system, whereas a small locality who doesn't have the ability to transfer money from multiple projects because they don't have multiple projects have to cover their entire deficit. So if their estimate goes up, they have to cover the whole increase. Whereas a larger locality that has a wherewithal to have multiple projects can move money around across their own locality, to cover deficits that they may have due to inflation or whatever it may be. So we're not proposing to not let that locality have that money, but what we want to do is go through a prioritization process. So maybe that smaller locality needs the money now, and we can get that money spent now rather than waiting 12 months and giving that and transferring money from that large locality from one project to another and waiting 12 months for them to get to advertisement.
What might be helpful, Mr. Lawson, is to have Russ walk through these numbers. So we had quite a bit of conversation around this last time, and I think Ms. Hines and perhaps others asked that we bring back some additional data points to demonstrate what's happening now with those transfers from revenue sharing to revenue sharing projects, and then revenue sharing to non-revenue sharing projects. So if we could walk through that, and then we can continue the discussion.
I'm sorry, I misheard. I thought Russ said ask questions as we go. No, I'm fine with listening to the slideshow and then raising the points. And I was pleased that you got the comments from John Bishop circulated. But I'm happy to raise my questions at the end if that's your preference, Angel.
I wasn't meaning to curtail your questions. I was just saying that going through what's on the screen right now may provide some additional insights to this conversation. So it might help to walk through these numbers, and then we can continue along that line of discussion.
But I want to assure you, Ms. That there's the intent is to use the money as quickly as possible to get as many projects done as possible. We just want to make sure that it's done in a fair way for both the large localities and the small localities. If someone needs the money, we want to make sure they get the money so they can get it advertised. But we want to make sure the money is used as quickly as possible. Today, if we have this transfer, we have these transfers. The money can sit for a year until the next advertisement cycle, while another locality may need the money today. And because they don't have multiple projects, they have to either eat the whole increase or not advertise the project. So we want to make sure everyone gets the money they need. It's just done in a more equitable way, so that in a more efficient way is what we're trying to do here.
But who's going to make that call?
So we believe the policies that we've proposed will do that in just that manner. So we have a set of priorities that we'll go to in a second, because I think one of the questions we had last time was, well, what are the priorities? What would the priorities be? So we've got a list of priorities here in a couple of slides.
But who makes the ultimate decision? The CTB or DDOT staff, or who makes it?
So I think with the policies in place, the policies will make the decision. I don't have to make a decision, because the policies will say, first tier are these projects that are in deficit. Second tier are these projects. And I have that list here coming up in a couple of slides.
Did you say that again, Russ? You're saying the policy will make the decision and not the CTB?
So we would
It's a board policy.
So we will have a board policy to say where the priority of the redistributed allocations go, which projects get them first. So and we've got a slide on this. So for example, if a project has been advertised, it gets a bid, and the bid is higher than the allocations, that project, of course, is the highest priority to get redistributed allocations. Of course, they get their funding. And then, but we have some caveats as far as how much extra funds any one project should get, and also at what levels the board approves it, and what levels the it can be disapproved administratively. And that's in accordance with existing CTB policy.
I got to tell you, it is amazing to me, and I've done several of these revenue sharing projects over the years. I got to believe all of them, when they go to bid, exceed the estimate, if for no other reason, given the amount of time that it takes to work through the process. You got to be a heck of a guesser to come up with a number. I'm looking at one right now that we got approved back in 2015, and it's just now getting ready to be built, just now going out to bid. There's no way you're going to come up with the right number. And if that's the issue here, that we're exceeding, could we maybe not look at some things to get them closer in time, so that the estimates at least are consistent with costing today, as opposed to, in this case, 8 years in the future? I mean, that number is always going to be off, isn't it?
Well, so can I offer something here to my colleagues? This program used to operate in years 1 and 2 of the 6-year plan. And we had a lot of trouble with people getting these projects launched and under construction in that time period. During COVID, when we had the big economic downturn, revenue sharing moved out to years 5 and 6, and with a lot of angst on everybody's part about these projects being so far out, because they tend, the biggest match can be $10 million. That's the most state money will put on the project. So it's a $20 million generally project. The issue of that in them being so far out, we brought it back in years 3 and 4, and the hope is that now they're ready to go to construction in year 3, so that in fact we're not having this huge lag, because I think everybody shares that concern, Ty. I gotta believe that 2015 one is an outlier. I mean, that's a data point that we could ask for, is how much stuff is hanging out that's really old, because in fact the program's supposed to be implemented quickly. And I think that's another thing we need to kind of like keep our eye on. Over the years I've been on the board, our goal is to get the money out the door and being put to use for the people of the Commonwealth. And so we want these programs. They're supposed to be nimble, to move quickly. So I just offer that as a, maybe something else we want to look at is how many things are out there hanging out, and what can we do to move them along. But I would just say, the one outlier is not the reason to write a policy to address it.
No, but it seems to me we have set aside funds for these overruns that could be allowed. I thought we were allowing them to tap into those. It also seems to me that we are disincentivizing these localities not to save on projects if we take the money away, if they've saved money.
So I think that's the heart of the change that we're being asked to consider, is whether revenue sharing dollars should move to revenue sharing projects that have a gap. And I think we should let that, let's keep looking at the data. I mean, some of the things we hoped for in 2018, we actually achieved. The move from revenue sharing to non-revenue sharing was something we added at the end. It doesn't look to me like we need to continue that. So I think we should be talking about within the revenue sharing projects, what's the right thing. And we have to remember that the locality has to bring half of the money of any increased bid to the table. This is a 50-50 program. It doesn't change once they go to bid. So they have to have some money to bring to the table too on a higher bid. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents, folks, for what it's worth.
I think Kim would like to.
Yeah, I just want to add one quick point, that part of the recommendation that we're proposing is to create a reserve to help cover overruns on revenue sharing projects. There's not currently a reserve that's available for these projects.
So for those localities that are achieving cost savings in some manner, that's great. But the point isn't, any sort of penalty along those lines. The point instead is to have, as Kim just said, a pot of money that can be used for revenue sharing projects that find themselves in the opposite scenario.
Rather than have them,
But you're going to take away from those that
So the intent is not to take any money away from any one project. Remember, these allocations are made by project. So locality will apply for an allocation for a project, and we give them their allocation for the project. If they need a surplus under this process, if they need extra money, then yes, they'll get the extra money as long as there's allocations available on a statewide basis. So everyone in the whole state has access to the funds, not just a large locality that may have 4, 5, 6 projects. They're high in some, low on others. They get to average it out, versus a smaller locality that only has one project. They come in, their estimate comes in high. They have nowhere to turn. They have nowhere to turn except for their own coffers. And so the big projects and the localities that have the wherewithal are benefiting from having lots of projects, and the small localities have no ability to access surplus funds on a statewide basis.
Or that smaller localities project sits and waits until it can apply for more money, which then makes the cost go up even more.
So the intent is to make sure everyone that needs the funding can get the funding in the most expeditious manner possible.
Russ, did you all get participation from our customers, the stakeholders, like the transportation directors or planning departments of the different counties, cities, and towns, so they could have input into this? What's being proposed?
For this round of policy initiatives, we have not had the opportunity to do that. It was just part of what we're doing today.
Well, yeah, but nobody's on the line but us, right?
Yeah, that's true. And I'll be honest with you, we the last time we did this, we did send out surveys to localities and ask them a bunch of questions. And once we got to the meetings, we had a little input from the large localities, but we didn't get
I got input from small localities. I did it on my own. I inquired with
I did too, Greg. I just happened to participate in the meeting at the end of our CTB meeting, and I called Frederick County, which, by the way, I never thought of as a large locality, but they'll be complimented to know that they're thought of that way. And they had no idea that this was going on. And so I said, John Bishop, you need to look at this. And he did. And he wrote the memo and circulated it. But I would think those folks definitely ought to be consulted before we make any changes in the policies here. They do this every day. And he actually made a comment too. He said that there are a lot of folks within the Stanton District Office at VDOT that he works with on a regular basis on revenue sharing. And he asked if they were involved in this process. And apparently they're not. But I would think before this is good information and we ought to go through it. But I was really surprised when I read his email and his comments to it. And he, I think politely but strongly said he's not in favor of these revisions, and maybe would suggest others if we could get folks like him involved.
So Frederick County is one of our larger users of the revenue sharing program. They're pretty active in the program. In fact, over the past 8 years, I think we've had, Terry, correct me if I'm wrong, $20 million of deallocated funds from Frederick County. So they use a lot of funds, but they also turned in a lot of funds too. So they've been a part of this, the whole process. They're very well adept at it, so they know how it works. So yeah, we can certainly.
And yeah, I'll just chime in here and just say, we work at the pleasure of the board. So if you all want to incorporate a round of either targeted feedback or general public feedback, we will incorporate that. We're certainly inviting the public to participate in these meetings, and we'll continue to do that. But if you all feel there's a gap there, because where we're headed is for this group to solidify recommendations for policy changes, whatever they may be, and then that will be presented to the full board at such time we're ready to do that. So we really look to you all to say what you need in any direction from Mr. Yates as the chair, the manner in which we fulfill what you all think you need in order to be comfortable making those policy recommendations to the full board.
Well, let me say that we were on a fast track maybe to get this to the board in June, but I think we're okay if we push it back another month, which was one of the original options. Is that correct, Angel?
Yeah, I mean, so for everybody's edification, we probably got started a little later than would have been ideal, but we are where we are. Our interest isn't to, curtail input or, more deliberation amongst you all. Our interest was to get these policy changes in place to inform the upcoming application round. So, we'll, as the months go on, obviously that opportunity will move away from us because folks will, need to adhere to those application deadlines. And so any changes that we make that aren't in place until, let's just say, summer, won't make an impact on the application side until the next round.
Yes, so
Listen, if we did a 30-day delay to have localities who use this program give input, would that still be acceptable timing wise and help when the new applications come in?
Yeah, I think it's more impactful to the TAP program than the revenue sharing program as far as the policy changes.
So do we need to do them concurrently though? Could we push the TAP program quicker, or do we want input on the TAP program too?
I think we get input on both, but I think maybe we might have more concurrence on the TAP program.
Yeah, we can sort of see where we land today, and then we'll be in
yeah,
person.
okay.
We'll be in person next week, and then we can sort of solidify whether we want to put them on separate tracks.
Okay, why don't we go ahead and certainly take other questions. Why don't we go ahead and try to push through a little more data? But I could see us certainly delaying the revenue sharing program by 30 days for public input, and we can make a decision on the TAP program at the end of today. How about that?
Yep. Sounds great. Thank you very much. And thanks for the
point, Ty. Really appreciate that.
Thanks, Greg. That's a good move.
Yeah. Great questions. And
go ahead and proceed.
So with this table, we were asked the last meeting to provide the number of revenue sharing transfers and to show how that information changed pre the 2018 policy and post the 28 policy. And these tables provide that information. And what you can see is pretty readily is that the number of transfers, the actual number of transfers was cut by about 2/3 for the revenue sharing to revenue sharing projects. But the average value went up quite a bit. So where the number of transfers were cut back, the value of the transfers actually kind of went up. A little bit all over the board with the state, but the average went up a good deal.
Does anybody have questions? Maybe we'll pause there on the revenue sharing to revenue sharing, what we're showing there, contrasting 2018 to post 2018.
Do you have a guess on why the overall value increased?
All I can guess is folks are being more selective about what they were asking for, because there were more constraints put on how they could do it.
Explain that, Russ. What do you mean constraints?
So prior to the policy change, locality could, I think we had Michelle chime in if I get this wrong. They had, I think, 12 months after a project was completed to transfer their funds, and they could transfer funds to projects that weren't going to add for 24 months. I think that was the policy, and we constrained that to 6 and 12 months. Michelle, did I get that close? Are you there?
Yes. Can
Okay.
you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And then we, prior to 2018, localities a lot of localities were using revenue sharing to fund very large projects. So we're getting localities that were funding 40, 50, $60 million projects with revenue sharing because they could keep coming back every year. Because once you're a revenue sharing project, you're a priority for more revenue sharing money. So these large localities would keep coming back and get more money for certain projects, and we constrained that to $10 million. We said, we're not going to give you any more than $10 million for any one project. The program's just not big enough to have 5 or 6 or 7 large localities eat up $10 million each year for large projects. So how that fits in with the selectiveness, I really don't know, but it just looks like they're just being more selective because the number of transfers, a third, but that value, what is that, almost double. I mean, easily double. Not so much on the revenue sharing to non-revenue sharing project process. The number of transfers dropped by about a third again. The value stayed about the same.
So when you say more selective, they're picking their best one or best ones and shedding
the
others.
most money, maybe I'm not really sure how that, where that's coming from. But you see some of the number of transfers drop dramatically. You look at Bristol, we went from 227 to 12 over that year, which is pretty dramatic. But the number went up. You see how much the average went up from 62 to 460,000. So I don't really have a good answer for why.
We'll ask some of these localities to explain what are you all doing? Why did you do this? To get some intelligence on what's happening here.
Yep. And what we don't have is, when we've never tracked is how many of these other localities that didn't have access to funds, how many times that they had to pay for the increase, because they didn't have access to surplus funds. So, that's something that's in the background that we just don't know. We just don't know.
But you realize the bulk of them they're all being backstopped by private development. They're not really, it's not for the most part, in my experience, coming out of the city, county, or town's money. It's coming out of the private sector that's backstopping them.
Well, that's true for some local. Frederick County is one of the ones you're probably most familiar with. They do use a lot of developer money, which is why
it's not true for the small rural communities.
Yeah, not for the
nor is it true in Nova.
Yeah,
right.
So I think the experience in some of that northern Winchester and Frederick, they do things a little bit differently, which is also, by the way, why we see so many deallocations coming from them, because we see a lot of quite often you see developers, it just fall through, and then so we end up deallocating a lot of money from those localities too, which means money set and didn't get used. So we bring it back and we deallocate it and bring it back to the application process. So we can't preclude that, but it does slow down the spending of the money on occasion. Any more questions on this slide? So the point is the original intent of the policy changes was to get more money into the deallocation process, share it more equitably across the state, and then make it more efficient. And we saw that it happened. That absolutely happened with the policy initiatives. They work great when it comes to that. So not only do these changes represent additional allocations, but they also represent just workload on the staff here, both in terms of fiscal transactions and in terms of evaluating the request and tracking the use of the funding afterwards. And the next slide provides a little information regarding that. Let's go to the next slide. So I'll ask you not to get into the weeds of all these examples, but what I can show you here is that each time we have a request for a transfer, we have to review every request to ensure the justification we're providing meets policy. And I'll be honest with you guys, I've seen these justifications get really creative over the past few years. I think last week or last meeting, Terry gave an example of an allocation that went up just magically by the same exact, or the estimate went up the same exact number as an allocation, that surplus allocation that our project had. And we see a lot of that. And some of these are just examples of those. And I'm sure Michelle, as the program manager, she has to manage each one of these, can attest to what I'm saying. That I hate to use the word manipulation, but we see a lot of the manipulation of project completion dates. Is it really complete? Is it not complete? And then advertisement dates and estimates across the whole state. And we have to evaluate each one of those each time we get this request. So it does create a lot of work on our part, and it creates even more issues tracking what happens afterwards. So one of our pilot initiatives, which we'll touch on the next slide, is to provide those allocations when the locality needs the allocation. That's what we were talking about before. Rather than letting it sit, the transfer, rather than letting it sit for another year until the locality says they might need it. And we'll get to that in a few minutes. So we feel that our proposals here will simply eliminate all this confusion and all the resources needed to ensure we're following policy. If you need the additional funding, we plan to give you the additional funding when you need it. And as simple as that. So whether you're a large locality or a small locality, we want you to get the funding you need to get the projects advertised and get them completed when you need it, and use that money as quickly as possible. So there's no need to waste energy with all these, this gamesmanship sometimes we see. So I'll move to the next slide. So we were asked about a prioritization process, and here's how we propose that we would actually prioritize the redistribution of the funding. The next two slides provide that answer for both revenue sharing and TAP, with TAP being a little bit differently. So first of all, our number one priority for allocation needs to be to any project that has a current bid that is higher than their available allocations, subject to the CTB approval limits. And we have those in the next slide. What I don't have here, there probably ought to be a second one here, or a 1B, is projects that are ready for advertisement, whose estimates are higher than the allocations available. That should really probably be 1B. So all those two should be kind of wrapped in together. So if you've got a project that is going to add or has been advertised and it needs money, we need to make sure that the money available goes to those projects so that they can get done. Simple as that. So whether you're a small locality or a large locality, you have your own money or not, we need to make sure everyone has access to this funds as equitably as possible.
Which is the second?
Yeah,
That number two.
Priority.
Yeah.
Yeah, the second one is we say within 12. Did we say within 12 months?
Yeah.
There we say within 12 months. I think it's not 12 months is like the next step, but if you need a project now, if you're going to add today and your estimate is too high and you can't go to add without knowing you have some money, we need to make sure you have that money to go to add. If you have a project going to add in 12 months, we have time. So that would be the third priority here, is if you're going to add in the next 12 months, let's make sure we get money to you in time for you to advertise that project. Third, we mentioned this a few minutes ago, we need to make sure we have some balance for emergency situations or for reallocation for the next application cycle. So we're proposing having some minimum amount in our balance entry to cover situations where, there's an emergency, we need the money, it has to get done, and because of the size of the programs, we're going to recommend $5 million for revenue sharing and $2 million for transportation alternatives. And then fourth, we need to make sure that we cover those localities that have projects under construction and for some unforeseen reason go into deficit during construction. So something comes up, they need additional money during construction. We need to make sure they get the funding they need to complete the project. And of course, per code, revenue sharing project localities with revenue sharing projects can always come back during the next application cycle and ask for more money, regardless of the estimate of the project. Any questions on those priorities? I think I have Kim. Kim wants to add something here.
Just want to clarify that the deallocated money that gets moved to these projects based on these priorities would not be to cover added scope, only the original scope that was approved.
And we have a few caveats here for additional restrictions or limitations on the funding. The redistributed allocations would not be available for additional scope unless that's absolutely necessary to complete the original purpose and need. We don't want scope creep. We don't want additional we don't want new projects created from old allocations, basically.
How does that work? I'm curious, and I must live in a world of outliers, because we just completed a project where the scope was changed on a cost share project, much to the frustration of my client, because they were the backstop on a $20 million project. And I believe, thankfully, the thing was a little under budget, so VDOT did cover it, but actually it was directed. The scope was something that was directed by VDOT. They added a turn lane on a road that we connected to, and the county didn't want it, and the developer didn't want it, but VDOT mandated it. So the scope of the project changed. I've forgotten, it was several $100,000. So are you saying that we're going to have a policy that won't allow that, or it will allow it in certain circumstances, or what's the proposed policy or rule for that?
So this would be consistent with Smart Scale and HSIP and any of our other projects. When you apply for a project, you're applying for a specific purpose and need and a scope of the project. So we don't want folks coming back and asking for more money because they decided they want some betterment on the project. They want, they didn't plan on brick pavers, now they want brick pavers. That's a minor amount, but they don't, they didn't plan on undergrounding utilities, but now they want underground utilities. That's not what you applied for. That's not what the board gave the money for. So now I don't know your specific issue with that project. Sometimes scope can be modified to meet the original purpose and need, and that will happen sometimes.
Right?
Or there may be some requirement that comes along down the line that you didn't know about, wetlands or environmental or whatever it might be, that causes you to technically change the design, but you're not changing the scope for the purpose and for the purpose and need perspective. I think Kim wants to add something.
I know this sounds like bureaucratic semantics, but we do make a distinction between a scope change and a design refinement. And a design refinement is something that's required by, design standards or federal regulations or state, it's not added scope. It's not changing what the purpose and need of the project originally was.
Well, again, my circumstances, it was working on a road that was off property. And it added a turn lane, and I mean, these things happen, I suppose. And I'd be leery if what you're describing is you want flexibility to be able to address these, that you wouldn't want to have a policy that unintentionally cuts these things off.
Yeah, I don't think those. Again, I don't know the specific situation, but we can look into it. But
well, maybe that's when we have the input from the localities, they can give you these real life examples, and then we can decide whether we want to have a policy to incentivize that, or in this case, I would have preferred on behalf of the client that it didn't happen because it cost us more money. Right.
And what we want to avoid is folks asking for, and this is probably more applicable for the TAP program, asking for one project, you providing funding for one project, and then that project drastically changes to something else. That's not what you approved. That's not what you gave money for. And we see quite a bit of that, probably more in the TAP program than we do the revenue sharing program. So that's what we're trying to avoid. So yeah, we can follow up a little bit more on that and have some more feedback on that. So, continuing with this, the $10 million per project for revenue sharing is a current policy in place. We are proposing a $2.5 million maximum allocation for TA, and I'll get to that here in a few minutes. And the redistribution allocation increases would be per current board policy. So this table down here shows the current board policy. Anything above these amounts get approved by the board. Anything below these thresholds, you are provided for information purposes, what has happened throughout the month. That's correct, Kim?
Mhm.
So anything above, so if it's a $5 million project, anything above 20% in the state allocations to the project, you would approve it or disapprove it.
It's part of the monthly transfer report that I bring to you all each month.
So it would be consistent with current SYIP board policy.
So Russ, I have a quick question. So the maximum amount we can give to any revenue sharing project is $10 million. So this is the total. So if the total cost is between 10 and 20, and they've already asked us for 10, we actually don't cover anything, right?
We don't cover anything more than $10 million in state allocations for projects. So $20 million, 10-10 match. They can have a $40 million project, but we still only give up to $10 million of state allocations for revenue sharing.
Yeah, yeah. So if we're already at 10, there is no state contribution. There is no additional funding.
There is no additional. That's what the second bullet tries to get to. We can't exceed that threshold. Any more questions on this?
Yeah, I've got one around this retention money that everybody can tap into. We had indicated that we wanted to line ourselves more with Smart Scale on as many features of Smart Scale as we could. And we're allocating $5 million as a holdback for cost overruns, and in Smart Scale, I think it was a 12% number.
Yes, sir, that's right.
So what's the thinking behind a 5% number for this? I understand when inflation cools off that the need for this number is not necessary, or a higher number is not necessary, but I don't think we're there yet, and I think that we're going to have cost overruns that we would like to. I feel like should take care of, and we should allocate the money to that pool.
So Mr. Laird, just so we're clear, you're questioning, one, how did we come up with 5? And alongside that are we sure 5 million is really adequate right now?
Correct.
Maybe $5 million on the revenue sharing minimum.
Yeah.
So I guess to get to your point about folks needing more money, that would just be the bottom. That would be what we would shoot for as having a balance. But as we're moving allocations throughout the year, so if one locality has a surplus, that would immediately go to wherever we need it to go if it's needed at that point in time.
So the 5 million is a minimum. It could be.
It's what we would strive to keep in the balance entry. Now, it doesn't mean that we would go below that, or but it's just to your point, Mr. Laird, is we would, as the allocations happen throughout the year, those funds would be moving to other projects that need them immediately. So in essence, we would have more than $5 million at any one time, ideally.
And that's assuming that everybody agrees we want to do this deallocation process, and that might not be the best assumption thus far.
Right. And today we have a deallocation process, but as I think Terry went through last week, or last meeting, that it's a once a year deallocation process. Money will sit for 9 months or longer, probably longer, and Michelle can clarify that with me. And before we get to the deallocation, for it to get put back into the application period. So we're not using any of the money It's just going back into the application period. Whereas if we had a rolling deallocation process, I can immediately take the surplus from project A and put it on project C that needs it today.
Right. But I think, Mr. Laird, you're asking, even if we set aside the notion that the deallocation process could be used to, maintain, if not increase, the value of the balance entry account so if we set that aside, are we confident and comfortable that 5 million is the right number to put into that account to handle cost overruns?
Correct.
I don't know if Russ or any of his team can speak to the adequacy of 5 million based on your knowledge of monies that are, been identified for transfers for projects that, need additional funding. If not, we can certainly do that as a follow-up item.
Yeah, I would just offer up just as a potential consideration that our current baseline is 0. I mean, we're not holding, we don't have an initial start. So at 5 million, it's an excellent question, but we also have in circumstances where we'll have a canceled project that literally is $2.6 million that could roll in and then become immediately available on top of that. So I think the root of it, and Michelle can correct me if I'm wrong or get it wrong, is we want it to be respectful of the allocation process and for the board's consideration and the application process, so that we stepped into something. If we identified that we needed to have additional resources withheld and set aside, that could be something that we could come back to the board for consideration. But as a starting point, I think that's where the root of 5 million came from.
Yeah, if we go back to the average, the average request of $255,000 for revenue sharing and 308 over 5 years, that's if we use that as a basis, we might want to, I think you do the math there. I think that bumps you up to like a $15 million bonus. If you try to divide 308 by 5 and then multiply that by 255, just say that's what we need on the average. That's like $15 million. But to Terry's point, today we have nothing to give anybody anything except those localities that have surplus funding in their coffers themselves. And that's, again, going back to that, we're trying to make sure that everyone has access to the extra money, not just those that have that have lots of projects. Yeah. So we can look at the $5 million to see if it's adequate. I certainly think it's a good start. But if we need to bump that up, it's a $100 million program. That's $15 million. That's 15% of the program in a year. Right. Certainly reasonable to look at. Any more discussion on that?
The recap.
So with that, I'd like to just recap some of the things we talked about and maybe just get a little more feedback. We've got some great feedback so far, and any more discussion on revenue sharing. So I'm going to go through the policy recommendations that we've made, and remember these policy recommendations kind of correspond to the chart that we sent out, and I resent that out last night for everyone.
Hey, can we pause at each one to get a pulse check?
We will.
Okay.
We will. So policy 1, this is just administrative. Our current policy says it's an annual process. We're not doing an annual process now. It's biennial. So policy 1 would just be to formalize the biennial process that we've already implemented.
And would that be shared with the board on a twice-a-year basis also?
So this would be the current process, just formalizing or formalizing the current process of every other year of an application process rather than an annual process.
So we take applications every other year,
which is what we're doing today,
as opposed to annually. So we're going to stretch it out.
Well, that's what we're doing today. So we're doing a biennial process today.
Right. So we've been, in essence, functioning in a manner different than what the current policy states. So
And the
this
current
first-
policy says do it annually?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Feedback,
Well,
I'd
to
recommend we do it
clarify-
annually.
So
To clarify, we have sort of somewhat conflicting board policies. The revenue sharing policy outlines an annual process. Your 6-year program development process, which guides development of the entire program, specifies a biennial process. So that
Interesting.
was adopted after the last revenue sharing policy. So we're just trying to align those now.
For
So-
what it's worth, and I'm new, but I'd recommend we do annually. If we're going to try to be nimble, stretching things out over 2 years is kind of working against that concept.
Right, so the thinking behind the biennial process is it gives you more money to allocate, so you can make more project selections. The money goes farther and you can do more with it, as opposed to an annual process.
No, I understand, but I think the devil is in the budgeting of these things, and again, my experience is these things just drag on, and the numbers they're no good, because when the project actually goes to bid, it's way outdated. So if we could look at these things annually, I would think that would be better than every 2 years.
Right, I believe that a significant reason that the projects take a long time to get to advertisement is one, in some instances, it takes us a long time to get the project under agreement, which I think Russ is going to talk about. But also because oftentimes the project isn't fully funded when it's selected. And so it's waiting for subsequent rounds of revenue sharing to request additional money, or it's waiting to apply for smart scale money. And that can introduce, 2 to 4 years of delay in the project.
And I will add that a big delay with our localities, and we're doing our best to get localities to move more quickly, because and understand that the longer they wait, the more expensive their project becomes. One significant delay we have with localities with the larger projects, not with the small ones, is their procurement process. When it takes them, you probably reach out to any of them, 9 months, easy for them to hire consultants. Sometimes that goes into a year. So when they get the money, and this is part of the problem, when you get the money year one and it takes you 9 months or a year to procure a consultant before you even start design, then that money is set there for a year. If I give you money in years 3 and 4, or even 2 and 3, or whatever it may be, then you have money. You can begin that procurement process. We haven't actually, deployed the cash until they've got their consultant in place. And it doesn't mean you're not going to get reimbursed for any expenses that you might incur during that process. Absolutely. Once you're under agreement, you're good to get reimbursed. But we don't have that cash outlay until years 3 and 4, which is, I think, was part of the purpose of years 3 and 4. And even more, it was 5 and 6 earlier, but we brought that back into 3 and 4. So none of this is when the allocations are available really doesn't slow the projects down. If someone wants to start earlier, Kim's group is really, we talk about the word nimble, we're nimble about moving allocations around so that folks can get their allocations early if they need it early. But we don't see projects moving that quickly on local localities. We just don't.
This goes back to the beginning for me, and it's why we ought to involve I'll call them our customers, our stakeholders, the localities. And if they're dragging this thing because it's taken them 9 months to get the design underway, or even to hire the engineer to do the design, that's something you need to let them know. And again, I'm involved in projects where we go ahead and pre-engineer it just to jump up that timeline. So there are ways around that, but in my mind, nothing gets better by dragging this out. The numbers just keep going up, and then we end up in these other problems that you're experiencing. So I'd recommend, and I'll vote for keeping it as an annual process.
It hasn't been.
Right. It hasn't been an annual process for probably 2018.
2018, I think.
And just one other point that I'll add on that is that it becomes burdensome from the locality's perspective when we're taking in applications for all of our funding programs at the same time. And so right now, smart scale applications are on a biennial cycle that is the alternate of revenue sharing. And so localities aren't scrambling to try to get revenue sharing and smart scale applications done at the same time. In fact, a lot of times we'll see an application for revenue sharing in one cycle followed by a smart scale application in the next cycle.
And I would just point out in 2018, when I did an extensive process up here, Ty, with my localities, they were very comfortable with the alternating years because of the level of work required for all of these applications going into the portal.
I guess the thought I would have is it sounds like it would be good to hear from these folks that are actually applying and what would they like to see.
Yep. We can do that. I think we'll find that this is less taxing on their staff and our staff because we're alternating TAP revenue sharing 1 year, and that's about this, not quite the same size as smart scale, but it's probably 400 applications statewide between the two, and then you go to smart scale. So it benefits both our customers and us that we can spread out our resources across those 2 years. But we can certainly have more conversation on that. And Mr. Lawson, I think you're talking a lot of project development type issues. I'd love to have an off conversation with you to bring you up to speed and let you know what we've been doing in the past to help localities move things along a little more quickly, and to encourage them to move projects a little more quickly. Because we know the quicker we can get these projects out the door, advertised, the better it is for everyone, not only the localities but their citizens, and that's really what we're shooting for. So
feel free to call me, Russ.
Absolutely.
I'd love to talk with you and see what I can do to help that along.
Yeah, absolutely, because we've been working on that for a long time.
Hey, Russ, quick point. Are we mandated to hard stop at noon because the advertisement, or because we've got a lot more information? What's the status on that?
I think we'll have to hard stop at noon. We have another CTB meeting at prep meeting at
okay.
1. I mean, that's what we're here for. We're here for all the conversation.
We can't get through what we had hoped to get through today. That's certainly that's fine. We can pick up next week when we're together in person, from where we leave off today.
Okay, well, let's stop at about 10 minutes up so we can come up with a strategy for, putting off one thing at 30 days and that kind of stuff. Look, I'm not leaving. I've just got to grab a power cord, so don't stop. I'll be right back.
Okay. That's great. So policy 2 was the discussion of.
So just so.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just so we're clear, rather than policy 1 sort of being a thumbs up from everyone, what I'm hearing is that we want to solicit feedback from localities prior to tagging policy 1 as, one that's good to move forward. Is that, make sure we have that?
I would certainly say I'm supportive of policy 1 at this point. But I went through this process 5 years ago, and I don't think it's changed for my stakeholders. So people want to do a survey. I'm supportive of a survey.
Okay.
All
right. Just want to make sure we're all clear.
Sure.
All right.
Thank you, Amy. 2, we talked about creating a balance entry, a minimum balance entry. We mentioned $5 million, but it sounds like we want to have a little more conversation. Is $5 million enough to cover what we need statewide? So we can do that. We can do some more math, do some numbers, and see what we can come up with. We don't want to take too much away from what's available by sticking it in a balance entry not being used, but we want to have enough available so when it's needed. So it's a balancing act. It's all a balancing act.
Yeah,
right?
it's all. So Russ, I have a data question for you guys here. Because you've said several times that small localities are kind of stuck if they have a cost increase. And so if you look at the 5 years between 2018 and today, can you tell us by district how many projects were canceled for lack of funding, because of cost increases? Just so we have a sense of what the magnitude of that problem is and how much additional money did they need. I do think it's important to know whether the locality could have come up with the match themselves, because that's another piece of the puzzle. And so, hopefully this isn't more than a dozen over the 5 years, but if it's more than that, then I think we need to know that too.
Right, and we'll look into that. I mentioned this earlier. I think the bigger question is how many had to cover the incomplete deficit.
Well, right. So it's kind of like three categories. They canceled it. They covered the deficit. They canceled it, but they had their part of the money, but there wasn't any money. They covered the whole thing, or they canceled it because they didn't have the match.
We'll certainly look into that. I'll be honest with you, that'll be a tough lift to try and find that information. We just don't track it, but we can see if we can't extrapolate.
Well, even if you could tell us how many were canceled by district, that might give us some.
Yeah, well,
you should be able to have that, right?
Yeah, we should have that.
Because there could be a number of reasons, and the ultimate decision after considering those reasons, some of which is likely, related to the funding, the locality determines, to cancel the project, but it isn't sort of a clear delineator that it was just because of a funding deficit.
To Mary's question though, y'all called these localities and said, why did you kick out of this?
We have, whenever we deallocate funds, we work through the districts and like projects that get canceled. Like I'll go back to Frederick. Frederick County had a few canceled just because the developers pulled out. And we said, why are you canceling? Why is money's been sitting there since 2018?
Right.
Why'd you cancel? Well, the developer pulled out.
So those conversations, Mr. Lawson, I think what Russ is alluding to is we don't have a data point where we're tracking that so that we could quickly grab that and say of the X number, this number, we're canceled for this reason.
No, I get it. We don't have it, but I would think, to Mary's point, is a really good one. Could we find out? We're trying to create a policy to stop that. Wouldn't it be wise to try to understand why are the bulk of them, if we can put it that way, or some of them are kicking out for a specific reason, and then we could come up with a policy to attack that issue, as opposed to just taking a shot at it and saying, let's have a policy and hopefully this will solve that issue. Because I'm guessing, for a locality to come up with whatever the number is, $500,000, $1 million, $2 million, and then go into this program and hope that we get a match and then hope that it goes forward, that is a complicating thing. And then you add a layer to it of, we've got the private sector that may or may not backstop it. Let's find out those reasons and then see if we can come up with a policy that'll help them with that.
Okay,
we got it.
Well, certainly having an amount in the statewide balance entry is a start, right? Because that's not something we have today.
Well, you're saying to cover overruns. I think Randy had a great point. Is that enough given the overruns that you're seeing elsewhere? But I do think it's an awful shame to get to the very end and everybody agrees to it. We just got a problem. The state doesn't have the money to cover its half. So I think the concept is a great one. But again, I'd defer to you all as to how many times does this happen and how much money do we need to cover?
Got it. Okay. Number 3, and that basically gets to the statewide prioritization process to make sure any surplus allocation from a project is available to all projects statewide that need it. So rather than, again, as we get back to allocations for major projects, not the localities, how do we prioritize the process so that everyone that needs any additional funding for whatever legitimate reason has the ability to get it? So that's the prioritization process.
So I would just point out that there is another change in here that you haven't kind of explicitly called out, which is that because you're saying balance entry or surplus funds are going to be treated by pulling them into this balance entry account at the state level. If the board decides not to do that, if they decide to, which is kind of what happened last time, we didn't go all the way that you all recommended. So right now you can move your revenue sharing money from a surplus from an existing revenue sharing project to another existing revenue sharing project with some rules. You can also take it to a non-revenue sharing project. I want to be absolutely clear that I am fine with removing the non-revenue sharing projects from this cascade. I don't see the utility in that. We saw a big drop. I just don't. I think we should keep the revenue sharing money within the revenue sharing program. That's my personal opinion. I don't know what others think, but I think it's time for that piece of the program to go away. And that's a legacy from when there wasn't any other money except revenue sharing. And so it was used that way. And we have lots of other sources of money at this point.
Totally agree with you, Mary, on that one. Should not go
Go ahead, Angel.
I was going to say, Ms. Hines, so I think if I could just state back to you what you may be suggesting is that policy 3 really could be expressed as a couple of options that are still on the table. One would
That's right.
To eliminate transfers, really, right, and move
that are controlled by jurisdiction. I mean, that we're basically the jurisdictions moving money, right?
Right, and instead move that surplus money to a statewide balance entry account for further allocation. The second option would be instead to maintain the ability to do those transfers from revenue sharing to revenue sharing, the change there being eliminate the ability to transfer from revenue sharing to non-revenue sharing.
Right. And, if the will of the board was to stay revenue sharing to revenue sharing project, I do think we might want to think about what the guardrails are or the limitations might be in order to address some of the issues that you all have raised, whether it's the length of time before something goes to advertisement or the length of time you can sit on the money. I just think if we were going to do that, we might want some better guardrails than we have right now.
Okay.
Sure.
So we can work on that for next time, and certainly as we solicit feedback, so it's not a all nothing. These are sort of options within the state consideration. Okay.
Thanks, Ms. Hines. Yeah, and to your point, Ms. Hines, I think a lot of this is just legacy. Because it goes way back to the formula allocations. Localities don't have formula allocations anymore like they used to, and they have always seen revenue sharing as their replacement for formula allocations.
Right.
I understand that.
I think this is on a journey, Russ. I really do think it's on a journey, and sometimes you just can't get to the end. You gotta stop along the way here.
Yeah.
And
which is why we treated this originally, and better than I did, is an incremental approach. We didn't go all in because we knew all in wasn't going to work.
Right.
So that works. So policy 4, we didn't talk about here, but I think you talked about last week, was to get our agreements done more quickly. Currently, we have a year grace period to get agreements signed. Most of those agreements get signed within 5 months. So there's no reason for a year to be the norm. So we want to reduce that to 6 months.
And is that pretty standard for our other programs? 6 months?
So TAP, we have a year, and but we get things done generally within 6 months. There are some specific localities that we have issues with, but we think we have some strategies to help them out.
There aren't other agreements.
Yeah, other funding programs don't establish a time frame in which to get the agreement in place because other funding programs don't assume the project is locally administered, which is a little bit different than revenue.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
so this is for locally administered projects.
Gotcha. Okay.
Locally administered projects. And then finally, allow year-round deallocations. We touched on it a little bit today, rather than an annual deallocation approach, and that gets to providing surplus money to projects that need the money today and using the money more efficiently and most quickly. If we can just do it as the surplus funds become available, provide it to localities that need it, rather than waiting until a deallocation process that happens every January. That would certainly spend the money more quickly and help localities get projects out the door.
So who would reallocate that money, the board or staff?
So it would just be kind of done as projects were completed or canceled, and then any transfer of funding would show up on the monthly transfer report I bring to you all, either as a transfer for your information or a transfer for your approval. But it always goes back to the deallocation balance.
Right. According to the policy.
You'd let us know, but you'd let us know that you've done it.
Yes.
Versus now, it actually is an affirmative vote by the board and a decision by the board.
It would still be that.
It would still be that. It would just be part of a larger monthly transaction that gets approved by the board.
Yeah, I think the point of this one, Mr. Lawson, is the staff are holding these deallocations to a once a year exercise. This would allow it to happen, in real time, as those balances are known and can be deallocated.
Okay. So if we had a question, it'd be up to us then to pull that out of your report and say, what is this, and whether we approve that specific item or not.
Sure.
We have to do that.
Normally, and I'm making a bit of an assumption here, which is dangerous, but normally, each district administrator reviews the board packet each month with their board members, and there's an opportunity for you to ask questions about anything that's on that transfer report of your district folks who would know about these as well.
So if I could chime in as a district person, they do review the transfers. I do sign off on transfers in between meetings when we're moving money around up here. And the deallocation process, I am very in the loop about which projects are going to be deallocated. And so that would be my only request about doing deallocations year round, would be that out of courtesy, the district rep would get, the same kind of letter that we're currently seeing, where you're sending it to the jurisdiction saying, hey, we're going to deallocate this, that the district rep be in the loop on that, so that none of this is a surprise to the district rep.
Absolutely. And coupled with policy 3, we'd be able to get the surplus funds to projects that need to get advertised or on the street more quickly. Right now, there is no process to do it.
Right.
It gets deallocated and gets put back into the application process.
How do the at-large folks get this? When you say district folks get briefed by their district engineer or rep, how do the at-large folks get this information?
I get briefed the same time my district rep gets briefed.
Scott joins me for our briefing.
Right. That's usually how it happens.
But that's for that district, right?
Yeah, but you can just ask your engineer. You should be joining that
meeting.
meeting.
You can join any district you want, long as you're not the third person.
Okay. So it'd be I understand. So it'd be incumbent on me to get it from all the districts.
And Mr. Lawson, currently
all the districts.
Well,
I wouldn't do all the districts.
For our annual process, currently, Mr. Lawson, the LAD sends the whole entire state's deallocations to all the at-large members, and then the individual district deallocations to the district members. So last year, all the at-large members got a list of statewide deallocations. But this process would have to be done, individually each month.
Each time. So you just send it each month to us then?
I think the district engineer would let you know during their briefing that, hey, we have these projects that are going to get deallocated that had surplus funds. We're going to move them. We're going to move them all. And, or they're getting extra funding. They're because you provide new money on the board action items on the list. So they'd give you both. Which one's got deallocated? Which one's got more money? From the prioritization process. So it would go both ways.
So I'll just point out that Ty and Randy and Mark Merrill are they all live in the same district. And Ty and Randy are both at large. So one of you guys might want to affiliate with a different district because only two of us can be in the briefing at the same time.
That's a good point.
That's a great point.
And well, I understand how you could get it from the district engineer that's closest, but I'm not sure how I would get it from Northern Virginia, for example, or other places.
The whole report for the whole state is what is included in the board packet.
Mm-hmm.
So you wouldn't have to seek out anything. If you had a question about a transfer, you could reach out to Todd and he could get an answer from anywhere in the state, or you could reach out to me and I'd be happy to get you an answer, preferably before the board meeting, not during.
I'm with you.
I have all that detail in my head.
Thank you.
Sure.
So we've got some homework to do, it sounds like, for revenue sharing. Mr. Yates, I'm sorry.
Do we have agreement on, I'm trying to figure out if we have agreement on any of these. I'm thinking maybe 5 we have agreement on.
No.
I think there might be agreement on 4 and 5. And it's more a question of how it's communicated to us than anything else.
Okay.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Okay.
No,
So
I'm good with 1, but nobody else. We don't have a majority on that.
No, I'm good with 1 too, but we don't have consensus on 1.
Do we need consensus or we just need majority?
Well, I'm holding back until I hear from the stakeholders.
Okay, that's fine.
Mr. Yates, do we want to talk about next steps?
Well, I think next step on this would be we want to do the 30-day period for stakeholders.
We could also have the TA conversation, Greg, next week, because we really haven't had that at all.
That's correct.
But then say by some date in May, we would like people to stakeholders to weigh in. Are we talking about a survey? What are we talking about?
Ms. Hines, last time we did this, I have the whole book on the that we did a survey of our localities. You probably still have the book somewhere.
Probably not.
We had all the survey questions and we could pattern it similar to what we did in 2017 and basically kind of get to some of the points here that we talked. And we could get that out relatively quickly. My staff isn't shooting me in the background, but I'm saying we can get it done pretty quickly.
So we could work through some proposed survey questions and then run that through you all or through you, Mr. Yates, to just make sure we've covered the kind of feedback you want to receive. Thoughts about that?
Can you not just send the information? All I did was I asked our local guy if he was aware of it. I didn't send him anything. He actually went online, found your materials, Russ, and read through it very well and easily and wrote back.
So I would say, Ty, up here, I would like to send it to the heads of the transportation departments in the localities.
Yep.
So it's very helpful for them to get a survey from us. That lets Russ and those guys consolidate the information. The only questions I would have, Russ, is I think using the 17 survey as a base is good, but we have different people and the questions are, the proposals are a little different. It might be worth it to just send us the survey and let people provide you comment or add a question or whatever.
I think so.
And that would then let it go out we could finalize the survey at the meeting down in Bristol
Yep.
Yeah,
and let
I
you
think
guys
that's
get going.
Great.
that.
And I think it'd be great to see follow up on some of the policy. I mean, we should be on the policy initiatives we've already made and wrap it in. So how's it working for you? I
Yeah,
think
that's a
seem to be
great
pretty-
first question.
Yeah, seem to be pretty happy. I mean, folks seem to be pretty happy with the changes that we've made. And we certainly got more money out, folks. So we'll
Yeah,
work on that this week. We'll
Yeah, I'm
definitely-
just not sure that I think that I think the trouble we had last time was people had a hard time imagining the change. And I think we'll have that, we'll have a little bit of that again, that people are like, I'm happy with what I have. Why would you change it?
Well,
And
that is
so
true.
the goal of it, and we don't have any data right now that shows if we had these rules in place over the last 5 years, how it would have changed the flow of the money. So people are just guessing, and they're always going to guess not in the state's favor.
And remember, we had a lot of, I'll say pushback, but we didn't have anybody in favor of our changes last time.
I will say again, as I said last month, people were mad at me up here.
They were not happy with.
They were not happy with me. Northern Virginia was getting a huge proportion of this money because they had money and nobody else did. And so we do have to take our locality hat off and think about the statewide program. If you look at the NOVA numbers, NOVA's doesn't have the most projects at all, so it changed. How we use the program changed.
Right. And I can say all the policy changes work.
They did what we
They're
said.
fantastic. They're fantastic. Yeah. They did great. They did exactly what we wanted them to do.
Yeah.
So.
All right, so we will have a draft of the survey for your review and feedback next week when we're in person, which is probably great because we could sort of hold that, get through the TAP discussion, because that might change, a question or two perhaps on the survey, get through the review of TAP, and then, be ready next week to set a course for, subsequent discussions, understanding we'll have that 30-day review period, Mr. Yates.
That sounds good. And I wonder if should we set a virtual meeting maybe prior to the May meeting also, just in case we need it. We can always cancel it, but I'm looking at maybe May 17th is a week ahead, 10 to 12, if that works, or get some feedback. And we may not need it, but I just think we might want to consider that.
You get to.
Policy limits us to 25% of the meetings being virtual and not consecutive meetings. So we take care of the consecutive. So I just want to be clear, we would need to have additional in-person meetings in order to have another virtual meeting.
Okay. Well, we'll have the one not the one in April won't count.
It will. I'm just not sure how many more
we would have.
Yeah.
We'd
So
have
maybe
to
we
have
can catch about
8
a winery.
meetings, right? For 2 of them to be virtual.
You have to have
Right.
more.
I'm sorry, Ms. Hines, what was that?
We'd have to have 8 meetings total in order for 2 to be virtual.
Right. So the policy
Really?
you all just adopted limits the conduct of the virtual meeting, so they can't be back to back, but it also limits the total number of virtual meetings as a percentage of the subcommittee's work, if you will.
Can that be changed the next meeting?
Sure.
I think that comes from state code, unfortunately.
Yeah.
That 25%. I've encountered that in a number of other bodies I serve on.
So then
Okay.
you just need to have this as it could be a in and out meeting, but you could call this to order before each monthly meeting if you wanted to, right? Just to satisfy that rule.
Oh, I don't know that I would want to do that.
I would do
Let's
it.
use a cheaper policy. I'm
And
like,
we're all going to be there, and we have at least two
Well,
committee
we have
meetings
another
now, but you could call one and say, Does anybody have anything for the good of the order? And if there isn't, then we officially complied with that regulation.
Yeah, but see, we had an in-person meeting in March. We have April, we have May, we have June, and we would have July would be 5 in-person meetings. And we've had this one, so that's 6. We have to come up with 2 more in-person, 1 more in-person in order to do it.
Within the fiscal year?
Well, within this time frame.
Yeah, within the work of the subcommittee.
Within the work plan of the committee, because we're not a standing committee. If we were a standing committee, then we would, we could do it. I'm just trying to think of what did we say about people calling in? Is there any way to get a critical mass someplace of 3 of the 4 appointed members? Let's leave Ty and Laura out of it just for a minute. Is there any way to get 3 of us together in one place? And the 4th person could call in, because I think that's allowed.
Yeah, let me, I don't want to advise incorrectly. So if we could take that back and then present you all with the options for our, additional meetings when we're together in person next week.
Yeah, but I think that's logical. We can meet in a central place.
Okay.
Yep.
Randy and Mary could come to Culpeper, which is central, and then Fred could stay where he is.
And Fred could call in. Yeah. And
Right.
then if others want, if Laura and Ty want to come or call in, they can. But the committee as appointed only had 4 members. So that gives us some flexibility for not everybody having to travel.
Right. Does the 17th work for Randy? Would that work for you and Mary if we ended up in Culpeper District?
I don't have my calendar in front of me, but I think, as far as I know.
Okay.
It's a good day for me, Greg. I could come to Culpeper.
All right. Well, let's do tentative 10 to 12 that day, or push it back a little bit later if we need to. But let's try that. And if we need it, we may not need it.
That's May 17th.
Yep.
Why don't you call it from 10 to 2, just in case we need the time, we can always adjourn.
Sure, that's fine. That's fine.
No more than 2.
Okay.
All right, let's put that down.
And
10.
Greg, you'd have to allow people to attend the meeting in person.
Sure, gotcha on that.
Okay. Well, this is really good discussion. I know we didn't get quite as far as we thought we would, but I don't think there's any problem with that. I mean, we want it to be a well-informed, recommendation to the board. So we're happy to take your feedback and go back and do that additional work and be prepared to present that to you next week and walk through the specifics regarding TAP. So I think we have, what do we have next week, Russ? An hour and a half? Do you remember?
I don't remember how much time we have.
I think it's no more than an hour and a half. It may be just an hour.
Tuesday afternoon, is that where we're doing it?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. All right, well, thank you, everybody. It's a really good meeting. Didn't get as far as I'd hoped, but we really needed to do what we did, so that's great.
Yeah. Thank you. A great
Thanks.
discussion.
All
Thanks,
right.
everybody. See you next week.
You
All
too.
righty.
Bye.
Good one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
What time is the meeting on Tuesday? Or is it